The photo arrived while the house was still warm from my wife's perfume. Neon lights, a crowded bar, and there she was, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, pressed close to a man who clearly knew where his hands belonged. It felt unfair, in the most brutal way. While I waited at home, trusting her girls' night, she was out there, rewriting our marriage without my consent. The message beneath the photo was short, almost apologetic, sent by a bartender friend who shouldn't have been the one to tell me the truth. In that frozen moment, every late night, every unexplained mood swing, every quiet lie began to align into something darker. I didn't know it yet, but that image wasn't the betrayal. It was the doorway to a much larger nightmare. Before we dive in, drop your city and local time in the comments so I know where you're watching from. And if you're drawn to real stories told like movies, subscribe and stay with me. From the outside, there was nothing remarkable about the night it all began. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic goodbye. She stood by the mirror, adjusting her earrings, asking me almost as an afterthought whether the black heels or the silver ones looked better. Her voice was light, casual, practiced, the kind of voice people use when they want everything to sound normal. He told her both were fine. He always said that Ethan Hale had built his life on being steady, the kind of man who believed consistency was a form of love. He woke up early, worked long hours, paid the bills on time, remembered birthdays, and never raised his voice. He believed marriage wasn't about fireworks every night, but about showing up, again and again, even when things felt dull or difficult, especially then. Avery Hale hadn't always been distant. Once, she used to sit on the kitchen counter while he cooked, stealing bites and laughing at his terrible singing. Once, she used to text him in the middle of the day, just to say she missed him. But over the past year, something had shifted quietly, gradually, like a tide pulling away from shore. It started with her phone. At first, it was nothing obvious, just small changes. She began turning the screen face down on the table, taking calls in the other room, smiling at messages she never explained. Ethan noticed. Of course, he noticed everything, but he told himself what reasonable men tell themselves. Privacy wasn't secrecy, and trust meant not interrogating the person you loved. Then came the nights out. Just dinner with the girls, she said the first time, shrugging into her jacket. You don't mind, right? He didn't. Why would he? Everyone needed space. Everyone deserved friends. The second time, it was drinks after work. The third time, a birthday celebration for someone Ethan had never met. Soon, the nights had names, excuses wrapped in social obligations, and slowly, the frequency increased. Once a month became once a week. Once a week became twice. Each time, she came home a little later. Each time, she smelled a little different, citrus instead of lavender, woodsy notes that didn't belong to any perfume she owned. Ethan noticed, but he didn't accuse. He kissed her cheek, asked if she had fun, let her tell him just enough to feel convincing. Inside, something uneasy began to form. It wasn't jealousy, it was disorientation, the feeling that the woman sleeping beside him was becoming a version he no longer fully recognized. Conversations shortened, silences grew longer. When he reached for her at night, she was often already asleep or claimed to be. Once, he tried to joke about it, asked if he was being replaced by a cooler crowd. She laughed too quickly, told him not to be ridiculous, kissed him on the forehead like one might soothe a child. The moment passed, but the tone lingered. Ethan hated that kiss. He hated how small it made him feel. Still, he did nothing. He told himself love meant patience. He told himself marriages went through phases. He told himself he was overthinking things because work had been stressful lately, because he hadn't taken a vacation in too long, because insecurity was a personal flaw, not evidence. But the signs kept piling up. There were unexplained charges on their shared card, small amounts at first. Bars, ride shares, late at night from neighborhoods she never visited before. New clothes appeared in her closet, tags removed, explanations vague. "A sale?" she said once. "A gift from a friend," she said another time. He nodded. He always nodded. What bothered him most wasn't any single lie. It was the pattern, the way everything seemed to require just a little suspension of disbelief, a little self-betrayal. Trust, he was learning, could be eroded not by explosions, but by 1,000 quiet compromises. The night of the photo, Avery had been different from the moment she started getting ready. More focused, more careful. She changed outfits twice, checked her makeup under different lights. When Ethan offered to drive her something he hadn't done in months, she refused instantly. "No, it's fine," she said, a little too sharply. "I'll take a ride share. Don't wait up." The words landed wrong. He watched her leave from the doorway, keys jingling, heels clicking down the hall. For a brief, irrational moment, he considered following her, just to ease his mind, just to see. The thought embarrassed him. He stepped back inside, closed the door, and told himself to stop. The house felt too quiet after she left. He tried to distract himself with television, with emails, with anything that could fill the silence. But his attention kept drifting to the clock. 10:30, 11, midnight. He imagined her laughing, leaning close to her friends to be heard over music. He imagined nothing inappropriate. He forced himself to imagine nothing at all. Then, at 9:47 p.m., his phone buzzed. The sender was Miles. Miles Rivera had been Ethan's friend long before he was a bartender. They'd met years ago, back when both of them were still figuring out who they wanted to be. Miles was observant, quiet in a way that meant he noticed everything. He worked nights now, tending bar at a place downtown that attracted a polished crowd. Expensive taste, careless morals. Ethan almost didn't open the message. Almost. The image loaded slowly, as if giving him time to change his mind. But once it appeared, there was no unseeing it. Neon lights blurred in the background, glasses on a polished counter. And there, unmistakably, was Avery. Her face turned toward the camera at an angle that revealed a smile Ethan hadn't earned in months. Her body leaned into a man, whose arm curved around her waist, with easy familiarity. Too easy, too practiced. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. The man's face was partially obscured, but something about him tugged at Ethan's memory. The posture, the confidence. The way he stood, as if he belonged everywhere. It wasn't a stranger. That much, Ethan knew instantly. The caption beneath the photo read, "Bro, is that Avery?" Miles hadn't accused. He hadn't exaggerated. He'd simply asked the question Ethan was suddenly terrified to answer. Ethan stared at the screen, his reflection faintly visible over the image. For a moment, he felt nothing. Then everything hit at once. Confusion, humiliation, anger, grief. A sharp, burning sense of injustice. While he sat at home, choosing trust, she was out there choosing something else. And yet, beneath the shock, something colder began to surface. A realization. This wasn't random. This wasn't a single bad decision, made after too many drinks. The pieces fit too neatly. The secrecy, the rehearsed stories, the distance, the lies that were small enough to hide inside normal life. The photo wasn't the betrayal. It was proof that the betrayal had been going on for a long time. Ethan locked his phone and set it face down on the table. His hands were steady, which surprised him. Somewhere inside, a line had been crossed, not by Avery, but by him. The part of him that had been willing to doubt himself, to excuse everything, to stay silent for the sake of peace, was gone. He didn't know who the man in the photo was yet. He didn't know how deep this went. He didn't know whether Avery would come home apologetic or defensive, guilty or cold, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He was done pretending. Whatever waited on the other side of that image lies, manipulation, secrets far worse than he could imagine, he was going to find it. Quietly, methodically, like a man who finally understood that love without truth was just another form of loneliness. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced slow, useless circles above him. Every time he closed his eyes, the image returned Avery's smile, the man's arm, the intimacy that didn't belong to him anymore. He replayed the photo again and again in his mind, dissecting it like evidence from a crime scene. Angle, lighting, body language, the way her shoulder tilted inward, not away, the way her hand rested casually against the man's chest, as if it had done so many times before. When Avery finally came home, it was nearly 2 in the morning. Ethan heard the door before he saw her, the quiet click of the lock, the careful way she slipped off her shoes, as if trying not to wake him. He stayed perfectly still, breathing evenly, pretending to sleep. He wanted to see who she was when she thought he wasn't watching. She stood there for a moment, just inside the bedroom doorway. He felt her gaze on him, measuring, hesitant. Then she moved toward the bathroom, closing the door softly behind her. The shower didn't turn on. Instead, he heard the sink, the faint sound of water running, makeup wipes, the ritual of erasing a night she would never fully explain. When she finally slid into bed beside him, her body was careful not to touch his. There was a gap between them that felt deliberate. "Hey," she whispered. He murmured something non-committal, still facing away. "You awake?" She seemed to accept that. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Sleep came easily to her. It always did. For Ethan, something fundamental had shifted. The woman beside him felt unfamiliar, like a stranger who had memorized his life, just well enough to blend in. The next morning, he watched her over coffee. She looked tired, but not guilty. She chatted about traffic, about a friend's new job, about nothing that mattered. She kissed his cheek before leaving for work, her lips lingering just long enough to feel convincing. Ethan smiled back, nodded at the right moments, played his role flawlessly. Inside, he was already somewhere else. By noon, he found himself standing outside Juniper and Slate. The bar looked different in daylight, less seductive, more exposed. The windows reflected the street instead of glowing from within. Ethan hesitated before pushing the door open, feeling a strange mix of dread and resolve. If the answers were inside, he needed to face them sober. Clear-headed, Miles was behind the bar, polishing a glass. When he saw Ethan, his expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. Concern, guilt, relief. "You came," Miles said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan replied. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "I needed to." They didn't hug. They didn't joke. Miles poured 2 coffees without asking and gestured toward a small table near the back, away from the windows. "I didn't want to be wrong," Miles began once they sat. "That's why I sent the photo instead of saying anything. I needed you to see it yourself." Ethan nodded. "How long?" Miles exhaled slowly. "Long enough to know it wasn't the first time." The words landed like a controlled burn. Miles explained carefully, choosing each sentence with restraint. He described Avery coming in alone, at first, always dressed well, always scanning the room before sitting. Then the man started showing up, confident, familiar with the staff. He never overdid it. No loud laughter, no obvious affection, but there was an intimacy in how they spoke, how they leaned close even when the music was low. They usually sat in the back booth, Miles said, the one near the storage hallway, easy to miss, easy to hide. Ethan pictured it instantly. The shadowed corner, the illusion of privacy. "Did she ever ask about me?" Ethan asked. Miles hesitated. "Once, she asked if I knew you well. I said yes. And she didn't say anything else." That hurt more than Ethan expected. Miles continued. "Last night was different. They were closer, more relaxed, like they'd stopped worrying about being seen." Ethan swallowed. "The man, do you know him?" Miles nodded slowly. "Yeah, name's Gavin Cross." The name snapped into place. Gavin Cross, smooth, well-dressed, mid-40s, the kind of man who spoke in calm, persuasive tones and made eye contact just long enough to feel disarming. Ethan had met him once months ago at a charity mixer. Avery had insisted they attend. Gavin had been introduced as a consultant, a connector, someone who helped ambitious people get where they wanted to go. Gavin had shaken Ethan's hand firmly, smiled politely, asked what he did for a living. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. And yet, something about him had lingered. "He comes in a lot," Miles added. "Usually alone, sometimes with different women. Always leaves with someone else." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Different women." Miles nodded. "Yeah." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it settling between them. "There's something else," Miles said finally. "And I don't know if it matters, but it didn't sit right with me." Ethan looked up. "A couple weeks ago, I saw Avery talking to one of the servers, Noelle. They were tense. Avery handed her something, an envelope. An envelope. Ethan felt a chill run through him. Money? I don't know. Could have been, but Noelle looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want it. "Did you ask her?" She wouldn't say much. Just that Avery told her it was nothing, and to forget it happened. Nothing rarely needed an envelope. Ethan leaned back. The pieces, shifting into a new configuration. This wasn't just about an affair. There was movement beneath the surface: transactions, secrets, leverage. Whatever Gavin was, he wasn't just a man sleeping with someone else's wife. He was a problem. "Why tell me now?" Ethan asked quietly. Miles met his gaze. "Because last night, when I took that photo," Avery looked scared. That stopped him. Scared how? Like someone who realized they'd lost control of something. She wasn't smiling the whole time. Not really. She kept checking the room, flinching when Gavin leaned in too close. Ethan absorbed that slowly. It didn't excuse anything, but it complicated it. "Look," Miles said, lowering his voice. "I don't know what's going on between them. I don't know if she's using him or he's using her. But I know this. Whatever it is, it's not clean. And you deserve to know the truth." Ethan stood, pushing his chair back carefully. "Thank you," he said, "for the photo, for this." "You're my friend," Miles replied simply. "I wasn't going to let you live in the dark." As Ethan stepped back out onto the street, the city felt sharper somehow, louder, more real. The mystery was deepening, not clarifying, but for the first time since the photo arrived, he felt something close to purpose. He wasn't going to confront Avery. Not yet. If Gavin Cross was at the center of this, then rushing in blind would only give him time to cover his tracks. Ethan needed to understand the game before he played it. Needed to know whether Avery was a willing participant or a pawn who'd already lost. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Avery's name. For a brief moment, his thumb hovered over the call button. He imagined demanding answers. Imagined her face crumpling or hardening. Imagined lies layered over lies. He locked the screen instead. The truth, he realized, wouldn't come from asking. It would come from watching, from listening, from letting people reveal who they were when they thought they were safe. As he walked away from the bar, Ethan made a quiet decision. He would stop being the man who waited at home. Whatever Avery and Gavin were building in the shadows, he would step into the light and tear it open piece by piece until there was nothing left to hide. The evening Avery announced the next girl's night. Her voice carried a nervous brightness that didn't quite reach her eyes. She stood in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, pretending to read something amusing, while Ethan finished loading the dishwasher. The domestic normalcy felt staged, like a set built to convince an audience everything was fine. "I might be out a little later tonight," she said casually. "They want to try a new place downtown." Ethan dried his hands slowly, buying himself time. "Which place?" She hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. "I don't remember the name. One of those rooftop spots." He nodded, filing the detail away. Rooftop spots were easy to verify. Too easy. Lies that simple were usually placeholders. "I can drive you," he offered, keeping his tone neutral. Her head snapped up. "No, it's okay. I'll just grab a ride." "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said quickly. Then softer. You don't need to worry. The phrase landed like a warning instead of reassurance. As she got ready, Ethan watched from the doorway. The careful makeup, the deliberate choice of dress, elegant, fitted, not something she wore around him anymore. He recognized the effort. He recognized who it wasn't for. When she left, she didn't kiss him goodbye. She waved from the door, already distracted, already elsewhere. The house fell silent again. Ethan didn't turn on the television this time. He sat at the dining table, with his phone face down, hands folded, breathing measured. He told himself he wasn't waiting for anything. But every vibration from the street outside made his pulse spike. Every passing minute sharpened the sense that something irreversible was unfolding without him. At 9:38 p.m., his phone buzzed. Miles. Ethan stared at the name, heart pounding, before unlocking the screen. "You here?" the message read. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "No," he typed. "Why?" The reply came almost instantly. "Because she is." The room seemed to tilt. Before Ethan could respond, another message arrived. Then another. Finally, the photo loaded. It was clearer than the last one. No ambiguity. Avery sat at the bar this time, not tucked away in the shadows, her body angled toward Gavin Cross, her knee almost touching his. His hand rested on the small of her back, not tentative, not apologetic, possessive, familiar. Ethan's chest tightened until breathing hurt. The injustice of it all surged through him. Not just the betrayal, but the ease of it. The way she moved through lies like they were nothing. The way she came home every night to a man who trusted her, while offering the best parts of herself to someone else. Miles sent one final message. "I'm sorry, man." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding his system. But beneath the anger, beneath the heartbreak, something colder settled in. Clarity. He didn't call Avery. He didn't text her. He didn't confront Gavin. He stayed exactly where he was. Because for the first time, he understood that reacting would only give them control. Instead, he studied the photo. He zoomed in on details the way he'd once analyzed contracts at work. Gavin's watch, expensive, recognizable, a custom band, the signet ring on his right hand, the faint tattoo visible near his cuff when he leaned forward. Ethan had seen that tattoo before. The memory came rushing back. The charity mixer, months ago. Avery had dragged Ethan along, insisting it would be good for their network. Gavin had been there, leaning against the balcony railing, wine glass in hand. He'd talked about investments, about opportunities, about helping couples build something bigger together. Ethan remembered noticing the ring that night, remembered how Gavin's hand lingered on Avery's elbow just a second too long when he excused himself. Ethan hadn't said anything then either. The realization burned. He wasn't just being cheated on, he was being played. When Avery finally came home close to midnight, Ethan was waiting, sitting on the couch, lights off, except for a single lamp. The atmosphere was calm enough to feel threatening. She froze when she saw him. "You're still up?" "Yeah," he said evenly. "I couldn't sleep." She slipped off her shoes, carefully avoiding his gaze. "Sorry I'm late. It took longer than I thought. Where did you end up going?" She blinked. "I told you. A rooftop place." "Which one?" She frowned slightly, annoyance flickering across her face. "Why are you interrogating me?" "I'm not," he said. "I'm asking." She crossed her arms. "I don't remember the name. Does it matter?" It mattered that she couldn't keep the story straight. Ethan nodded slowly, as if accepting the answer. "Did you have fun?" "Yes," she said too quickly. "We talked? Laughed? It was nice." "Who was there?" "The girls. You know everyone." He watched her carefully as he asked, "Did you see anyone you knew?" Her eyes flickered away for just a moment. No. There it was. Clean, confident, false. Ethan leaned back, letting silence stretch between them. Avery shifted uncomfortably, the mask starting to slip. I'm tired, she said finally. Can we do this later? Sure, he replied softly. She walked past him toward the bedroom, shoulders tense. Ethan stayed where he was, listening as she moved around. As drawers opened and closed, as the bathroom door shut, he didn't follow. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began documenting everything. Dates, times, messages, photos. He saved the images Miles had sent, backing them up in places Avery would never think to check. He pulled up their shared account and noted the charges from Juniper and Slate, rideshare receipts that lined up too perfectly with Avery's girls' nights. This wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding the scope of the damage. Around 2 in the morning, Ethan stood by the bedroom door and watched Avery sleep. Her face was relaxed now, innocent in rest. He felt a familiar ache, love refusing to die quietly. But love, he realized, didn't mean blindness. The next morning, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Gavin Cross. The line rang twice before Gavin answered, his voice smooth and unhurried. Ethan, what a surprise. I was hoping to run something by you, Ethan said calmly. You mentioned an investment opportunity a while back. I wanted to talk. A pause, barely perceptible. Of course, Gavin replied. Let's grab a drink. Ethan smiled faintly, though Gavin couldn't see it. That was exactly what he'd hoped Gavin would say, because now the game was no longer happening behind his back. Now it was happening on his terms. Gavin chose the place. That alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. Juniper and Slate. Of course, the bar where Gavin felt untouchable, where the lighting was flattering, the music low enough for secrets, and the staff used to minding their own business. A stage he knew how to control. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat at a small table near the side wall. Not hidden, but not center stage either. He positioned himself so he could see the entrance without being obvious about it. His phone lay face up on the table, screen dark, recording app already queued but not active. Serena's voice echoed in his head from a brief phone call earlier that afternoon. Don't record anything illegally. Let him talk. People like him always do. Gavin walked in exactly on time. He looked effortless. As always. Dark jacket, open collar, confident stride. He scanned the room once, quickly, then smiled when his eyes landed on Ethan. The smile was warm, practiced, predatory in its ease. Ethan, Gavin said, extending a hand. Good to see you. Ethan stood and shook it. Firm, controlled. Thanks for meeting me. They sat. A server came by, and Gavin ordered without looking at the menu. Ethan noticed that, too. Familiarity bred carelessness. So, Gavin said, leaning back slightly. You sounded curious on the phone. I am, Ethan replied. You mentioned an opportunity a while back. Something about helping couples invest smarter. I've been thinking about it. Gavin's eyes flickered just briefly with interest. I'm glad. Timing is everything. That's what I figured. A beat passed as their drinks arrived. Gavin lifted his glass to timing. Ethan raised his own, touched it lightly, then set it down without drinking. Gavin didn't seem to notice. They talked in circles at first. Gavin spoke about market trends, about private investors, about how people who waited too long always regretted it. He framed everything as advice, as concern. Ethan listened, nodding at the right moments, asking just enough questions to keep Gavin talking. You and Avery make a great team, Gavin said at one point, casually slipping her name into the conversation. You've built something solid. Ethan kept his face neutral. Have we? Gavin smiled. From the outside, absolutely. From the outside, Ethan leaned forward slightly. You spend a lot of time with her. The air shifted. Gavin didn't tense, but something sharpened behind his eyes. We've crossed paths, he said smoothly. She's ambitious. Smart. You should be proud. Crossed paths, Ethan repeated. That's one way to put it. Gavin took a sip of his drink, Is there something you're trying to ask me? Yes, Ethan said calmly. I want to know why my wife is lying to me. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but loaded. Gavin set his glass down carefully. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do. Gavin studied Ethan for a long moment, then sighed lightly, as if disappointed. Look, he said, lowering his voice. I don't want to be in the middle of your marriage. You already are. Another pause. This time, Gavin smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Marriages are complicated, he said. People don't always tell each other everything. That doesn't mean they don't care. Ethan felt anger surge, but he kept it contained. Does it mean they signed documents without consent? Gavin blinked. Just once. It was enough. Careful, Gavin said quietly. You're venturing into territory you don't fully understand. That's interesting, Ethan replied. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the one who underestimated something. And what's that? My willingness to stay quiet. Gavin leaned back again, reassessing. The charm slipped, just slightly, revealing calculation beneath. Avery made choices, he said. As did you. I simply offered options. Did those options involve pressure? Ethan asked. Threats. Gavin laughed softly. That's a strong word. So is coercion. Gavin's jaw tightened. You're making accusations. I'm asking questions, Ethan corrected. The same ones your paperwork will answer. Gavin's gaze hardened. You should be careful, Ethan. People get hurt when they don't know when to walk away. Ethan held his stare. Is that advice? Or a warning? Gavin didn't answer. Instead, he stood. I think this conversation is over. Ethan remained seated. Probably. Gavin leaned closer, lowering his voice. For what it's worth, you should talk to your wife. She's more involved than you think. Then he turned and walked out. Ethan didn't move until Gavin disappeared through the door. Only then did he allow himself to exhale. He pulled out his phone not to chase, not to confront, but to document. Time, place, words exchanged. Every detail mattered now. That night, Avery tried harder than usual. She cooked dinner, lit candles, asked about his day. Her touch lingered on his arm. Tentative but hopeful, Ethan played along, answering politely, keeping his distance just subtle enough to feel like mood, not accusation. But when she mentioned Gavin's name casually, as if testing the waters, Ethan watched her carefully. He called today, she said. Said he ran into you. Ethan looked up. Did he? She nodded, studying his face. He said you seemed tense. I was, Ethan replied honestly. Her shoulders tightened. Why? Because I don't like being lied to. Silence fell heavy between them. Avery's eyes filled not immediately, but gradually, as if the weight of holding everything in was finally too much. You don't understand, she whispered. Then help me, Ethan said. Because right now, all I see is you choosing him over us. She shook her head, tears spilling over. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, he said quietly. Tell me the truth. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. And in that moment, Ethan knew. Whatever Avery was involved in, it went deeper than attraction, deeper than a careless affair. She was afraid not of losing Ethan, but of something else entirely. Something Gavin held over her. Ethan stood. I met with a lawyer today. Her head snapped up. What? I'm protecting myself, he said. And unless you start protecting me too, I won't be able to protect you. The words hit their mark. Avery broke down, then shoulders shaking, voice cracking. I never meant for it to go this far. Then where did it start? She wiped her face, breathing uneven, with a mistake, one I thought I could fix. Ethan sat back down slowly, heart pounding. Tell me, he said, and as Avery began to speak haltingly, painfully, Ethan realized the story he thought he was living was only the surface. Beneath it lay manipulation, fear, and a trap that had been closing for months, and Gavin Cross was only the most visible part of it. Avery's hands trembled as she spoke. fingers twisting together in her lap like she was trying to hold herself in one piece. Ethan didn't interrupt. He'd learned that silence, used carefully, could pull truth out of people faster than confrontation ever could. It started months ago, she said, eyes fixed on the floor. Before the late nights, before Juniper and Slate became a thing. Ethan leaned back, keeping his voice steady. Start where it actually started. She swallowed. I messed up at work. A compliance error, not huge at first, but it could have become one. I tried to fix it quietly. That's when Gavin showed up. How did he know? He knows everyone, she said bitterly. Or at least, he makes you think he does. He offered help, said he'd seen situations like mine before, said he could make it disappear. And the price. At first, she let out a hollow laugh. Advice, mentorship, coffee. He made it feel normal, like networking. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to understand our finances, our investments. He said it would help protect me, protect us. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The envelope, the paperwork, the pressure building beneath the surface. You told me it was for a promotion, he said. I told myself that too, she replied. I needed to believe it. Her voice broke. By the time I realized what he was really doing, it was too late. He had copies, emails, proof that could ruin me, ruin us. So you kept going, Ethan said, not accusing, naming. She nodded. He said if I stopped seeing him, if I stopped cooperating, he'd send everything to my boss, to regulators, to you. Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest. And the night's out. She hesitated. At first, they were meetings. Then, he made it clear what else he wanted. Did he threaten you? Ethan asked quietly. Yes, she said, tears streaming now. Not directly. He never had to. He just reminded me of what he could do. The room fell silent, except for her quiet sobbing. Ethan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street. He wanted to yell, wanted to demand why she hadn't come to him sooner, why she'd let it rot between them instead of trusting him with the truth. But he also understood something now. Fear could make good people disappear inside themselves. Did you sleep with him? Ethan asked, still facing away. A long pause. Yes, she said, once. The word landed with devastating finality. Ethan closed his eyes. The pain was sharp, clean, undeniable, but beneath it, the fog was lifting. He finally saw the shape of the trap they were in. Did he record anything? Ethan asked. I don't know, Avery whispered. That's what scares me. Ethan turned back to her, resolve hardening. We're not guessing anymore. She looked up, eyes red. What do you mean? I mean, we stop reacting, he said. We start controlling the situation. You can't beat him, she said weakly. He's done this before. He knows how to stay ahead. So do people who think they're untouchable, Ethan replied, until they're not. He picked up his phone and dialed Serena Holt. Serena answered on the second ring. Tell me you didn't confront him alone. I didn't, Ethan said. But we're done playing defense. Serena's voice sharpened. Good, because based on what you sent me earlier, we have leverage. We just need him to confirm a few things. Avery watched Ethan, confusion and fear mixing on her face. Who is that? My lawyer, he said. And if you want any chance of getting out of this with your life intact, you're going to do exactly what she says. Avery nodded quickly. Anything. The next 48 hours moved with terrifying precision. Serena laid out the plan carefully. No illegal recordings, no threats, everything documented. Every interaction, either witnessed or corroborated. Gavin's biggest weakness wasn't his intelligence, it was his ego. He liked to hear himself talk. He liked to feel in control. They would give him that illusion. Avery would message Gavin, apologetic but firm. She'd say Ethan was suspicious, that things were unraveling, and that she needed reassurance. Proof that he still had her back, proof that she was safe. Gavin responded within minutes. Ethan watched over her shoulder as the messages appeared. Confident, reassuring, manipulative. You worry too much. I've handled this before. Trust me, I wouldn't let anything happen to you. Serena's reply came shortly after Ethan forwarded the screenshots. Get him to meet. Public place. Let him explain himself. Juniper and Slate again. Of course, this time, Ethan wouldn't be sitting in the shadows. They arrived separately. Avery first, visibly shaken but composed. Ethan 15 minutes later, sitting at the bar where Miles worked. Miles met his eyes and gave a barely perceptible nod. Gavin arrived last. He smiled when he saw Avery, kissed her cheek like he owned the right. Ethan's hands curled into fists, but he stayed still. Gavin spoke freely, just as Serena predicted. He reassured Avery loudly enough for others to hear. He joked about paranoid husbands. He bragged subtly about how situations like this always worked out for him. What about the documents? Avery asked, voice trembling exactly the right amount. What if Ethan finds them? Gavin chuckled. He won't. And even if he does, he won't understand them. And if he talks to a lawyer, she pressed. Gavin leaned in, lowering his voice but not enough. Then I'll remind him who signed what, he said, and why. Miles's hands never stopped moving as he worked, but his eyes were sharp. Noelle, the server, lingered nearby, pretending to wipe an already clean surface. Ethan took it all in. Later, as Gavin excused himself to the restroom, Serena texted Ethan, "That's enough. We've got him." The fallout came faster than Ethan expected. Serena filed the initial paperwork the next morning. Regulatory inquiries followed. A financial crimes unit reached out for statements. Gavin called Avery repeatedly, angry now. No longer charming, Ethan answered one of the calls himself. "You think you've won?" Gavin hissed through the phone. "No," Ethan replied calmly. "I think you've lost." Gavin laughed, brittle and forced. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." "Neither did you," Ethan said, and ended the call. That night, Avery packed a bag. "I'll stay with my sister," she said quietly. "You need space." Ethan nodded. "So do you." At the door, she paused. "Do you hate me?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "but I don't trust you." She flinched, as if struck. Then she nodded. "That's fair." When the door closed behind her, the house felt empty in a different way. Not hollow, but honest. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, documents spread before him, phone buzzing intermittently with updates from Serena. The nightmare wasn't over yet. There would be consequences. Public ones, private ones, for Gavin, for Avery, for him. But for the first time since the photo arrived, Ethan felt something solid beneath his feet. The truth had finally surfaced, and no matter what came next, he knew one thing for certain. He would never ignore the warning signs again. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of waiting and watching. Ethan moved through his routines like a man rehearsing a former life, going to work, answering emails, eating meals he barely tasted, while everything beneath the surface churned. Every vibration of his phone made his chest tighten. Every unknown number felt like a threat. Serena called twice a day, sometimes more. Gavin hadn't disappeared the way men like him usually did. He hadn't fled or gone silent. Instead, he'd shifted tactics. Emails were sent through intermediaries. Messages came disguised as concern, subtle warnings wrapped in politeness. He was trying to feel out the edges of the net closing around him. "Classic," Serena said during one call. "He's probing, looking for panic. Don't give him any." Ethan didn't plan to. He spent his evenings documenting everything. Old emails Avery had forwarded him. Calendar invites that suddenly made sense. Financial records he'd never looked at closely before. Patterns emerged the way constellations did. Random points suddenly aligning into something undeniable. One name kept resurfacing. A woman named Lila Moreno. The first mention came from an old email chain. Gavin had been copied on something about a consulting referral, that had gone nowhere. Then Ethan found a legal filing Serena had flagged, buried in public records. Civil suit, settled quietly. No details disclosed. Ethan brought it up during their next call. She was married, Serena said. Her husband found out too late. Lost nearly everything before the settlement. Ethan closed his eyes. So we're not the first. No, Serena replied. You're just the first, who didn't break fast enough. The knowledge was both horrifying and grounding. This wasn't personal to Gavin. That made it worse and easier. Men like him didn't act out of passion. They acted out of pattern. Miles remained a quiet constant through it all. He kept his head down at work, but every time Ethan stopped by Juniper and Slate, Miles found a moment to check in. A look, a nod, a refill that came without being asked. The bar itself had changed for Ethan. What once felt like a place of betrayal now felt like a crime scene he understood too well. One afternoon, Noelle approached Ethan as he waited near the entrance. I heard things, she said softly, eyes darting around. About what's happening. Ethan studied her carefully. You don't have to get involved. I already am, she replied. I should have said something earlier. She told him about the envelope. Cash, yes, but also a folded note. Instructions, a request to confirm Gavin's presence on certain nights, to make sure the booth stayed available, to keep others away. He paid me to help hide them, she said, voice shaking. I hated it. Why didn't you refuse? Because I needed the money, she whispered. And because he knew that, Ethan felt a familiar anger rise not at her, but at the system that made predators like Gavin effective. He nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. That night, Serena added Noelle's statement to the growing file. Gavin called again. This time, Ethan didn't answer. The voicemail was different from the others. No charm, no subtlety. Just anger, bleeding through forced restraint. You think you're clever? Gavin said. You think lawyers scare me. They don't. What scares me is how far you're willing to push this. Because once it's out, you don't get to put it back. Ethan deleted the message without replaying it. He understood now what Gavin meant. The truth, once exposed, burned everyone it touched. There would be headlines, whispers, questions from colleagues, looks of pity or judgment. Avery's career would never be the same, neither would his own reputation. But silence had a cost too, and Ethan had already paid it for too long. Avery stayed true to her word and kept her distance. They spoke only when necessary, usually through brief, careful messages about logistics. Each conversation felt like walking across shattered glass, familiar shapes, but sharp everywhere you stepped. One evening, she asked if they could talk. Ethan hesitated before agreeing. She came over looking smaller somehow. No makeup, no heels, just a woman stripped of defenses. I met with my lawyer today, she said quietly. They're opening an internal investigation. Ethan nodded. Serena said that might happen. They might fire me, Avery continued. Even if I cooperate. I know, she swallowed. I deserve that, don't I? You deserve accountability, he said finally. That's not the same as destruction. She looked at him, eyes searching. Do you think we can ever rebuild? The question hung between them, heavy and fragile. I don't know, Ethan said honestly. And pretending I do would be another lie. She nodded, tears slipping free. I understand. As she left, Ethan felt a complicated mix of relief and grief. Love didn't vanish overnight, but trust once fractured didn't heal just because both people wanted it to. 2 weeks later, the first official notice arrived. Gavin Cross was under formal investigation for financial misconduct, coercion, and fraud. Assets frozen, travel restricted, his name surfaced in places he could no longer control. The calls stopped. The silence that followed was louder than anything before it. Ethan read the notification twice, then set his phone down and stared at the wall. He expected satisfaction, vindication. Instead, he felt empty, as if he'd been bracing for impact for so long that the absence of threat left him unbalanced. Serena called an hour later. This isn't the end, she cautioned, but it's the beginning of consequences. That's enough, Ethan said quietly. Public reaction came slowly. A few articles, some speculation, nothing explosive yet. But the undercurrent was there. A man like Gavin didn't fall alone. Others would scramble to distance themselves. Deals would unravel. Stories would surface. One night, Ethan ran into a man outside the courthouse as he left a meeting with Serena. The man looked tired, hollow-eyed. "Ethan Hale?" he asked. Ethan nodded cautiously. "My name's Marcus," the man said. "My wife." She knew Gavin too. Ethan's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," Marcus nodded. "I wish someone had done what you did sooner." They stood there for a moment, two strangers connected by the same wound. As Ethan drove home, the city lights blurred past his windshield. He thought about all the nights he'd waited in silence, all the doubts he'd swallowed, all the moments he'd chosen peace over truth. He understood now that peace built on denial was just another kind of violence. Quiet, slow, and devastating. At home, he poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the street below. His phone buzzed once more, a message from Avery. "Whatever happens next, thank you for not letting him win." Ethan stared at the words for a long time before replying. "I didn't do this to win," he typed. "I did it so we could stop losing ourselves." He set the phone down and exhaled. The storm hadn't ended. There would be hearings, decisions, consequences that stretched far into the future. But the worst part, the not knowing, the self-doubt, the quiet erosion of reality was over. The truth was out. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like the ground beneath him was real. Time did something strange after that. It didn't move forward so much as it stretched long, thin days, pulled tight with tension, each one humming with the knowledge that something final was approaching. Ethan learned to live inside that hum. He woke early, ran until his lungs burned, then showered and went to work as if nothing extraordinary was happening. On the surface, he was composed. Inside, he was bracing for impact. The first subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't addressed to him, but Serena forwarded a copy anyway, along with a short message. "This is accelerating. Be ready." Ethan read the document slowly, absorbing the formal language that reduced months of fear and manipulation into sterile paragraphs. Gavin's name appeared again and again, tied to shell entities, falsified disclosures, pressure tactics that now had a paper trail. What had once felt like an isolated nightmare was revealing itself as a system carefully designed, meticulously repeated. And then came the part Ethan hadn't expected. Avery was listed as a cooperating witness. The call with Serena that afternoon was brief, but heavy. "She agreed to testify," Serena said. "Voluntarily, that changes things." "For her?" Ethan asked. "Yes." And for him? Ethan hung up and sat in silence for a long time. He wasn't sure how to feel. Relief. Maybe. Fear. A dull ache where hope used to live. When Avery called later that night, he answered, "I wanted you to hear it from me," she said softly. "I told them everything." Ethan leaned back against the counter, eyes closed. "I figured, I know it doesn't fix what I did," she continued, "but I couldn't let him keep doing this. Not to us. Not to anyone." He said nothing. She didn't ask him to. "I'll be staying with my sister longer," Avery added. "The lawyers think it's best. That's probably smart," Ethan replied. They lingered on the line, both of them aware of how much used to exist in the space between words. Finally, Avery spoke again. "Whatever happens," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry," Ethan swallowed. "I know." After the call ended, he realized something unsettling. He meant it. The hearing was scheduled sooner than expected. Ethan sat behind Serena in the gallery, hands clasped tightly. As Gavin was led into the room, the man looked different now. Still well-dressed, still composed, but the arrogance had drained away, replaced by a tight, controlled fury. His eyes scanned the room, calculating, searching for familiar faces. They landed on Ethan. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single point of connection. Gavin's expression flickered not with fear, but with disbelief, as if he still couldn't accept that this had happened to him. Ethan didn't look away when Avery took the stand. Ethan felt his chest tighten. She spoke clearly, though her hands shook. She described the first meeting, the promises, the pressure, the slow tightening of the trap. She didn't minimize her choices. She named them. The room listened. When the opposing counsel tried to undermine her credibility, Avery didn't break. She admitted her shame, her fear, her silence. And then she said something that made Ethan's throat close. "I thought if I handled it quietly, I could protect my marriage," she said. "I didn't realize I was destroying it instead." Gavin's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Ethan stared straight ahead, vision blurred. By the time the hearing adjourned, the air felt heavy with consequence. Reporters gathered outside. Cameras flashed. Names were spoken aloud that had once lived only in whispers. Gavin didn't look at Ethan as he was escorted out. The fallout came quickly after that. Clients distanced themselves. Associates turned. Former partners issued statements of ignorance and regret. A man who had built his power on discretion now found himself exposed by it. One afternoon, Miles called. "He hasn't been in," he said. "Not once since the hearing." Ethan nodded. "He won't be." Miles hesitated. "You okay?" Ethan considered the question. "I'm getting there." The nights were still hard. Ethan slept alone now. The bed too large, the quiet too complete. But the silence was different from before. It didn't feel like waiting. It felt like space, uncomfortable, but honest. One evening, he found himself at Juniper and Slate again, sitting at the bar with a glass of water. No alcohol, just habit. Noelle passed by and offered a small, tentative smile. "I quit," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "Good." "I'm starting somewhere new," she added. "I didn't want to keep working in a place where I helped someone hurt people." He nodded. "That matters." As she walked away, Ethan realized something had shifted in him. The anger that once flared so easily now felt distant, like a fire that had burned itself out. In its place was something steadier, resolve, maybe, or acceptance. Weeks later, Serena called with the update Ethan had been waiting for. "They're filing criminal charges," she said. "Multiple counts." Ethan closed his eyes. "And Avery. She'll face consequences," Serena replied. "But she won't be destroyed." Ethan exhaled slowly. That was the best outcome anyone could hope for. Avery reached out one last time before the charges became public. "I know we're not us," she said. "But I wanted you to know I'm starting therapy. Not for us. For me." "I'm glad," Ethan said. "That's where it should start." She hesitated. "Do you ever think about what we were?" "Yes," he answered honestly. "But I think more about what I became when I stopped listening to myself." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I hope you don't lose that." "I won't," he said. And this time, he believed it. The morning the news broke, Ethan watched from his kitchen table as Gavin's name scrolled across the screen. The language was clinical, the accusations severe, the image of a man in handcuffs blurred slightly by motion. Ethan didn't feel triumph. He felt finished. Later that day, he went for a long walk through the city. Phone left at home. He passed cafes, offices, couples arguing softly on sidewalks, life moving forward, indifferent to the wreckage it left behind. He stopped at a small park and sat on a bench, watching the light shift through the trees. For the first time in months, his mind was quiet. He thought about the night the photo arrived, the shock, the humiliation, the moment his life split cleanly into before and after. He understood now that the photo hadn't ruined everything. It had saved him from a lie he'd been living, saved him from a version of himself that accepted half-truths and called it loyalty, saved him from becoming invisible in his own life. Ethan stood and turned back toward home. Steps steady, shoulders light. The story wasn't over yet, but the worst part was behind him. The waiting ended the morning. Ethan received the summons with his own name, printed cleanly across the top. It wasn't unexpected, but it still landed like a weight on his chest. Serena had warned him this might happen, that once the case widened, everyone connected to the transactions would be pulled into the light. Witness, context, confirmation. Truth required presence. The courthouse felt colder than he remembered. Stone walls, polished floors, the quiet echo of footsteps that made every movement feel significant. Ethan arrived early, taking a seat near the back, hands folded, posture controlled. He didn't want to be seen as emotional. He wanted to be seen as precise. Avery arrived later, escorted by her attorney. She didn't look at Ethan at first. When she finally did, her eyes softened not with expectation, but with acknowledgement. He returned the look with a small nod. No anger, no promise, just recognition of shared history and shared consequences. The hearing unfolded slowly, methodically. Financial analysts testified first, walking the court through charts and timelines. Shell companies, transfers disguised as consulting fees, documents routed through intermediaries. Ethan listened, absorbing the shape of the machine Gavin had built. It was sophisticated, deliberate, designed to confuse and intimidate anyone who questioned it. Then came the witnesses. Noelle testified, the voice steady, despite her visible nerves. She described the envelope, the instructions, the pressure. When the defense tried to paint her as unreliable, she didn't flinch. She repeated the facts, exactly as they were. The truth didn't need embellishment. Miles followed. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude as his friend took the stand. Miles spoke plainly, describing what he'd seen over months of quiet observation. Patterns, booth reservations, the way Gavin controlled the space around him. When asked why he hadn't intervened sooner, Miles answered simply, "I didn't realize how dangerous it was until I saw who it was hurting." Ethan's jaw tightened. He understood that too well. When Avery was called again, the room shifted. There was a tension that hadn't existed before, a collective awareness that this testimony mattered differently. She sat straight, hands clasped, eyes forward. She didn't cry this time. She answered every question directly. She acknowledged her choices without deflection. She described Gavin's threats with clarity, not hysteria. And when the defense attempted to frame her as manipulative, she met it head-on. "I made mistakes," she said calmly. "But I did not design this system. I was caught in it." Ethan felt a complicated swell of emotion. Pride, sadness, a sense of finality. Then it was his turn. Ethan stood, smoothing his jacket, and walked to the witness stand. He swore the oath, sat, and waited. The prosecutor began gently, asking about his marriage, his work, the timeline of events. Ethan answered carefully, staying anchored in fact. He described the first photo, the second, the inconsistencies. The moment he realized silence was costing him more than confrontation ever could. When asked why he hadn't confronted Avery immediately, Ethan paused. "Because I needed to understand what I was facing," he said, "and because reacting without clarity would have put me and others at risk." The defense attorney approached next. Eyes sharp, tone measured. "Mr. Hale," he said, "isn't it true that your marriage was already strained before any of this occurred?" "Yes," Ethan replied, "like many marriages. And isn't it also true that you benefited financially from some of the investments Mr. Cross facilitated?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "No." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "You didn't sign the documents." "I did not," Ethan said. "My signature was forged." A murmur rippled through the room. The attorney pivoted, pressing harder. "You waited weeks before taking action." "Why?" "Because I was gathering evidence," Ethan said evenly. "And because people like Mr. Cross rely on impulsive reactions, I refused to give him that." The judge watched closely. After Ethan stepped down, He returned to his seat, feeling strangely lighter. The truth, once spoken aloud, no longer pressed against his chest. It simply existed. The hearing adjourned late in the afternoon. Outside, reporters waited again, questions flying like sparks. Ethan didn't stop. He walked past them, shoulders squared, gaze forward. Serena followed close behind. "You did well," she said quietly once they reached the steps. "So did Avery," Ethan replied. Serena nodded. "That matters." The days that followed were quieter, but heavier. Decisions loomed. Sentencing recommendations. Civil settlements. Careers would be altered. Lives rerouted. Gavin's reaction came not in court, but through a letter. It arrived unmarked, forwarded through his attorney, short, precise, unapologetic. "You could have walked away. You chose spectacle." Ethan read it once, then handed it to Serena without comment. "Classic deflection," she said. "He still thinks this was about pride. It was about survival." Ethan replied. The sentencing hearing came weeks later. Ethan attended, though he wasn't required to. He wanted to see the end of the arc, not for satisfaction, but for closure. Gavin stood before the judge, expression controlled but hollow. When the sentence was read, prison time, restitution, lifetime bans from financial advising, something inside Ethan settled, not joy, completion. As Gavin was led away, he glanced once toward the gallery. His eyes met Ethan's. There was no rage left there, only calculation that had run out of options. Ethan didn't look away. Afterward, he stepped outside into the afternoon sun, blinking against the brightness. The city moved on around him. Cars passed. People laughed. Life continued. Avery didn't approach him. She didn't need to. That evening, Ethan returned home to a space that was fully his. Again, he cooked a simple meal, ate slowly, and washed the dishes in silence. The quiet no longer felt accusatory. It felt earned. He thought about the man he'd been before all of this, the man who waited, who doubted himself, who believed love meant endurance at any cost. He understood now that endurance without boundaries was just another way of disappearing. Later, as dusk settled, Ethan sat on the balcony and watched the lights come on across the city. His phone buzzed once, a message from Avery. "Thank you for telling the truth, even when it hurt." Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. It was the only way forward. He set the phone down and leaned back, breathing deeply. The story that had begun with a photo had taken him through fear, betrayal, and exposure. It had stripped him down to what was real. And what remained was solid. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his. The aftermath settled slowly. Like dust after a collapsed building, there was no single moment when Ethan could say it was over. Only a series of small realizations that life was no longer braced for impact. Mornings arrived without dread. Evenings passed without waiting for a door to open. The quiet became something he could inhabit rather than endure. He took a week off work, not to escape, but to recalibrate. He cleaned the apartment thoroughly, not because it needed it, but because order helped him think. He boxed away items that carried too much weight, photos from trips that felt like someone else's memories, gifts that once symbolized promises now broken. He didn't throw them out. He wasn't erasing the past. He was acknowledging it and choosing where it belonged. On the third day, Serena called to close a loop. "Civil proceedings are wrapping up," she said. "Restitution will take time, but the framework is solid. You won't be liable." "That's good," Ethan replied. He meant it, but the words felt procedural. The real reckoning had already happened. "There's something else," Serena added. "You should expect outreach. People connected to him. Some will want to apologize. Others will want favors. I'm not interested." Ethan said. "I figured," Serena replied. "Just remember, you don't owe anyone access to your life." After the call, Ethan went for a long walk along the river. The air was crisp, the light clean. He watched joggers pass, couples argue quietly, a father teaching his daughter how to skip stones. The world hadn't paused for his pain. It never did. And yet, There was comfort in its continuity. Miles texted that evening. Drinks. Not at the bar. They met at a small diner on the edge of the city. Neutral territory. Miles looked tired, but lighter, as if a burden he hadn't known how to name had been set down. You did the right thing, Miles said after they ordered. I keep thinking about how close I came to saying nothing. Ethan shook his head. You said enough. I almost didn't. Miles admitted. I told myself it wasn't my place. Ethan met his gaze. It was. Miles nodded, absorbing that. What now? Ethan considered the question. Now I figure out who I am when I'm not reacting. Miles smiled faintly. That sounds terrifying. Yeah, Ethan said, but it's also kind of exciting. They talked about ordinary things after that. Work, movies, a place Miles wanted to visit. Ethan noticed how easy it felt. No subtext, no careful wording, just presence. The next message from Avery came a few days later. She asked if they could meet, not to talk about the case, not to rehash the past, but to discuss logistics, remaining finances, shared accounts, the practical end of things. They met at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Avery arrived early, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking. She looked different, still familiar, but no longer performing. When Ethan sat across from her, there was no tension, only gravity. I'll be moving into a smaller place, she said. Closer to my sister. Ethan nodded. That makes sense. I've already transferred what I can, she continued. The rest will take time. I'm not rushing, he said. She hesitated, then looked up. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know. I just wanted to say. She trailed off, searching. I'm learning to live without lies. It's harder than I thought. Ethan believed her. It gets easier, he said, but only if you keep choosing it. They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, not hopeful, just honest. As they stood to leave, Avery paused. I won't reach out again unless you do. That's fair, Ethan replied. They walked out separately, their paths diverging without drama. It felt like the final page of a chapter neither of them needed to reread. Weeks passed. Ethan threw himself into work not as distraction, but as expression. He took on projects he'd once avoided, spoke up in meetings where he'd previously stayed quiet. The shift didn't go unnoticed. A colleague pulled him aside one afternoon and said, You seem different in a good way. Ethan smiled. I am. At night, he started writing again. Not reports, not emails, pages raw, unfiltered reflections he didn't plan to share. He wrote about trust and silence, about the danger of mistaking endurance for love, about how easily people convinced themselves that discomfort was the price of loyalty. The act of writing steadied him. One evening, his phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. This is Lila Moreno. Ethan stared at the screen, heart thudding. I heard what you did. I wish someone had done it for me. They exchanged a few messages, nothing heavy, just acknowledgement, shared understanding. The quiet relief of not being alone in an experience that once felt isolating. Ethan didn't respond to everyone who reached out. He didn't owe explanations, but he listened when it felt right. He learned to trust that instinct again. The city shifted into a new season. Trees shed their leaves. Air cooled. Mornings sharpened. Ethan bought new furniture, nothing extravagant, just pieces chosen deliberately. Without compromise, he reclaimed the space as his own. One night, as he sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, he realized he hadn't thought about Gavin all day. The name no longer carried weight. It was a fact. Not a wound. The photo, the one that had detonated his life, was archived now. He kept it, not as evidence, but as reminder. Not of betrayal, but of awakening. He understood something then that had eluded him for years. Healing wasn't about returning to who you were before the damage. It was about becoming someone who wouldn't accept it again. Ethan closed his eyes, and breathed in the night air. He felt steady, present. The story that began with a single image had unraveled a life built on assumptions. It had exposed injustice, demanded courage, and forced choices that hurt but clarified. He wasn't grateful for the betrayal, but he was grateful he hadn't looked away. The invitation arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped under Ethan's door without ceremony. No return address, no flourish, just his name, typed neatly on the front. For a moment, he considered throwing it away unopened. The past had taught him that not every door deserved to be opened simply because it knocked. But curiosity measured now, not reckless won. Inside was a single card, with a time, a place, and a short note written in careful handwriting. Closure doesn't always come when we want it. Sometimes it asks us to show up anyway. It was from Avery. Ethan stared at the words longer than he expected to. He'd meant what he said before he wouldn't reach out. But this wasn't reaching out. This was something else. An invitation. Not a demand. He waited a full day before responding. Then he sent a simple message agreeing to meet. They chose a public garden near the river, a place that felt neutral and alive. When Ethan arrived, Avery was already there, sitting on a bench beneath a tree, stripped bare by the season. She stood when she saw him, hesitated, then sat back down. The space between them remained untouched. "I won't take much of your time," she said quietly. "That's okay," Ethan replied. "I'm not in a rush." She nodded, absorbing that. "I needed to tell you something face to face. Not to change anything, just to say it honestly." He waited. "I've been writing," she continued. "Therapy suggested it. Letters I'll never send. Versions of the truth I avoided. And I realized, I spent years thinking love meant keeping things together at all costs, even if it meant breaking myself." Ethan listened, without interruption. He noticed how different this felt from their past conversations. No defensiveness, no strategy. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added, "and I'm not asking for reconciliation. I just needed you to know I finally understand what I did to us." Ethan considered his response carefully. "Understanding doesn't erase harm," he said, "but it matters." She met his eyes. "I know." They sat in silence for a while, watching people pass, couples holding hands, children running ahead of parents, ordinary life, unburdened by their history. "Are you okay?" Avery asked finally. Ethan thought about the question, about the months of chaos, the rebuilding, the quiet strength that had replaced constant vigilance. "I'm steadier," he said. "Not healed, but honest." She smiled faintly. "That suits you." When they stood to leave, there was no embrace, no promise to stay in touch, just a shared understanding that this meeting had been what it needed to be, and no more. As Ethan walked away, he felt lighter. Not because the past was resolved, but because it no longer demanded his attention. That night, he dreamed for the first time in weeks, not about betrayal or courtrooms or raised voices, but about driving with the windows down, a road stretching endlessly ahead. When he woke, the feeling lingered. The next chapter of his life began quietly. Ethan accepted a promotion he'd once been hesitant to pursue. The role required travel, decision-making, visibility. It also required confidence, something he'd learned the hard way. On his first day, as he stood in his new office, he felt a flicker of pride, not ego. Ownership. He filled the space intentionally. Books he loved. A plant he somehow managed not to kill. Photos that reflected who he was now, not who he'd been trying to preserve. Relationships shifted too. Some friends drifted away, unsure how to engage with the version of Ethan who no longer smoothed things over. Others stepped closer, drawn by his clarity. He learned that not everyone could follow you into growth, and that was okay. One evening, Serena invited him to a small gathering at her place. Colleagues, friends, people who knew his story in fragments, not headlines. Ethan almost declined, old habits tugging at him, but decided to go. That's where he met Claire. She wasn't introduced with significance, just another guest. They talked about books at first, then travel, then nothing in particular. There was no spark, no immediate pull, just ease. At the end of the night, as they stood by the door, Claire smiled and said, "You're very present." Ethan blinked. "Is that unusual?" She shrugged. "More than you'd think." They exchanged numbers without expectation. Over the next weeks, they met for coffee, then walks, then dinner. There was no rush, no performance. Ethan paid close attention to how he felt, not anxious, not eager to impress, just open. One night, as they sat across from each other, Claire asked, "Do you trust easily?" Ethan considered the question. "Not anymore," he said, "but I trust intentionally." She nodded. "That sounds healthy." For the first time, Ethan didn't feel the need to explain himself further. Life continued to settle into something sustainable. The case against Gavin faded from daily relevance, though its impact remained. Every now and then, Ethan would read an article about sentencing updates or regulatory reforms inspired by the scandal. He didn't linger on them. The story had served its purpose. What stayed with him were the lessons that couldn't be summarized in headlines. That silence could be complicit, that love without truth was a fragile illusion. That intuition, once ignored, would wait patiently until you were ready to listen on a crisp evening months later. Ethan returned to the river, where he'd walked during the worst of it. The city lights reflected off the water, steady and indifferent. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, breathing deeply. He thought about the man he'd been when the photo arrived. The shock, the humiliation, the fear of being wrong. He wished he could tell that version of himself something simple. "You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're not alone." But growth didn't work that way. You had to walk the path yourself. As Ethan turned toward home, he felt something close to gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it had forced. His life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, he had learned, was enough. The first test came quietly, disguised as opportunity. Ethan received the call on a Thursday afternoon, just as he was packing up to leave the office. An unfamiliar number. He let it ring once, then answered, "Mr. Hale," a polished voice said, confident and smooth. "My name is Victor Lang. I represent a media production firm. We're developing a limited series based on recent financial crime cases, and your name came up." Ethan leaned against his desk, eyes narrowing slightly. "In what context?" "As a key figure," Victor replied. "A husband who uncovered a sophisticated scheme. There's a strong human angle, resilience, justice, redemption." Ethan felt an old instinct stir the reflex to explain, to control the narrative before someone else did. He recognized it immediately. "I'm not interested," he said calmly. Victor laughed lightly. "I haven't even explained the offer." "You don't need to," Ethan replied. "My life isn't content." A pause. "You could help others by telling your story. People can learn without my pain being repackaged," Ethan said. "If you contact me again, I'll have my lawyer respond." He ended the call and exhaled, surprised by how easy the boundary felt. Later that evening, he told Claire about it over dinner. She listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "Are you sure you're okay turning it down?" she asked. "Some people might find meaning in it." "I already found mine," Ethan said. "It didn't come with cameras." Claire smiled. "Good answer." Not everyone approved. A few days later, a former colleague sent him a message suggesting he was wasting an opportunity. Another hinted that speaking publicly could clear Avery's name further. Ethan read the messages, then deleted them without reply. He wasn't responsible for managing anyone else's comfort with the truth. Avery reached out around the same time, her tone careful. "I heard someone's shopping the story," she wrote. "I want you to know I won't participate in anything like that." "Not without your consent." Ethan appreciated the sentiment. He replied simply, "Thank you, that was enough." The real challenge arrived when Avery's consequences became public. Her employer released a statement confirming disciplinary action. No details, just accountability. The internet filled in the rest with speculation, judgment, and cruelty. Old photos surfaced. Strangers debated her character as if it were entertainment. Ethan didn't engage, but he felt the familiar pull to protect, to explain context, nuance, fear. He resisted. Claire noticed the shift in him that week, the way he went quiet, the way his jaw tightened when he scrolled through headlines. "You don't owe the world anything," she said gently one night, as they sat on his couch. "I know," Ethan replied. "I just hate watching someone drown in noise." Claire studied him. "Are you worried about her, or about who you used to be with her?" The question landed softly, but precisely. Ethan considered it. "Both," he admitted. "But I can care without rescuing," Claire nodded. "That's growth." He smiled faintly. "Feels like restraint." "It is," she said. "The good kind." Weeks passed. The noise faded, replaced by the next spectacle. Ethan's life returned to its quieter rhythm work. Dinners, long walks, conversations that didn't require translation. Then, unexpectedly, he ran into Marcus again. They crossed paths outside a bookstore downtown, recognition dawning at the same time. Marcus looked better than before, less hollow, more grounded. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Marcus said. "Neither did I," Ethan replied. They grabbed coffee nearby. Catching up in careful strokes, Marcus talked about rebuilding, about therapy, about learning to trust his instincts after years of self-doubt. "I used to think being calm meant being safe," Marcus said. "Turns out it just meant I was quiet." Ethan nodded. "Same." Before they parted, Marcus hesitated. "I wanted to say, seeing you stand up changed things for me. It made me believe I wasn't crazy." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm glad." As he walked home, he reflected on how stories traveled not through headlines, but through human connection. That was the impact Victor's production company could never manufacture. That night, Claire stayed over. They lay awake talking, the city humming beyond the windows. At some point, she asked, "What scares you now?" Ethan thought about it. The question would have paralyzed him months ago. "Losing myself again," he said. "Not to someone else, to silence." Claire reached for his hand. "Then don't be silent with me." "I won't," he said, and he meant it. The following morning, Ethan received a message from Serena. "Case officially closed. Final judgments entered. You're free." He read it twice, then set the phone down. Free. The word felt almost abstract. Freedom wasn't fireworks. It was space, choice, breath. He celebrated quietly, a run by the river, a call to Miles. Dinner with Claire. At the diner, Miles raised a glass of soda. To choosing yourself, Ethan clinked his glass. To telling the truth. Later, as Ethan walked home alone, he passed a bar with neon lights glowing against the dusk. For a moment, his chest tightened. Memory flickered, then it passed. He realized then that healing wasn't about erasing triggers. It was about moving through them without losing your footing. At home, he found an old notebook tucked away in a drawer. Pages he'd written during the worst months. Raw, angry, afraid. He flipped through them, recognizing the voice but not feeling owned by it. On the last page, he wrote a single sentence. "I will not abandon myself to keep the peace." He closed the notebook and put it back. Not hidden, just stored. That evening, as he stood on the balcony watching the city settle into night, Ethan felt an unfamiliar steadiness. Not the rigid kind that cracked under pressure, but something flexible and resilient. The chapter that had begun with a photo had demanded everything from him: courage, restraint, honesty. It had stripped away illusions and replaced them with choice. He understood now that healing wasn't linear, and justice wasn't loud. Sometimes it was simply the quiet confidence to say no. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Ethan didn't wake up one morning feeling healed. There was no dramatic sense of arrival. No moment where the past finally loosened its grip and fell away. Instead, there were small tests, ordinary moments that quietly asked him who he was now. One of those moments came when his phone buzzed late one night, with Avery's name on the screen. He stared at it for several seconds before answering. "I know it's late," she said softly. Her voice sounded steadier than before, but there was still an undercurrent of caution. "I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." Ethan leaned back against the kitchen counter. "What's going on?" "I'm moving," she said. "Out of the city?" He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Okay. There's a hearing tomorrow," she continued. "Just a procedural thing. They don't need you, but I wanted to tell you, in case you heard it from someone else." "I appreciate that," Ethan replied. A pause stretched between them. "I'm not running," Avery added quickly. "I just need a place where I'm not constantly reminded of who I was." Ethan considered his words carefully. "That sounds reasonable." Her breath caught slightly, as if she'd been bracing for resistance that never came. "I wanted to say goodbye, properly." "We already did," Ethan said gently. "This is just the logistics catching up." Another pause, then, quieter. "I hope you're happy." Ethan didn't rush the answer. "I'm learning how to be," he said. "That's enough for now." When the call ended, he didn't feel shaken. He felt complete. The conversation hadn't reopened wounds. It had closed a loop. The next morning, Ethan attended a leadership meeting at work that would have terrified him a year ago. He spoke plainly, set boundaries, asked hard questions without apology. When the meeting ended, a senior partner pulled him aside. "You've changed," she said, studying him, in a good way. Ethan smiled. "I stopped negotiating with my instincts." She nodded. "That'll take you far." Later that afternoon, he met Claire for lunch. They'd settled into something unhurried and honest, a connection built on curiosity rather than urgency. They didn't pretend the past didn't exist. They simply didn't let it dominate the present. "I got an offer," Claire said as they sat down. 6-month research project overseas. Ethan's chest tightened, not with fear, but awareness. Here it was, another test. "That's big," he said. "Congratulations." She watched him closely. "I haven't decided yet." "When would you have to?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Ethan took a sip of water, giving himself space to check in. He felt disappointment. Yes, but not panic. Not the urge to cling or persuade. "What do you want?" he asked. Claire smiled faintly. "I want to go, but I don't want to disappear from something good either." Ethan met her gaze. "Then don't disappear. Go because you want to, not because you're afraid to lose momentum here." She studied him for a long moment. "You're not scared. I'll forget you." Ethan shook his head. "If something is real, distance won't erase it, and if it does, it wasn't meant to survive restraint." Claire laughed softly. "That's a very evolved answer. It's a practiced one," Ethan said. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I think I'm going to go." "I think you should," he replied, and he meant it. That evening, Ethan went for a run through the neighborhood he used to avoid. The streets where he'd once waited anxiously for ride-share notifications. The corners that held echoes of suspicion and self-doubt. They felt different now, not neutral, but reclaimed. As he slowed to a walk, his phone buzzed. A message from Miles. "You free? I've got news." They met at the diner again, slipping into a booth like old times. Miles looked animated, nervous in a good way. "I put in my notice," he said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" "I'm opening my own place." Miles said, small, honest, no back rooms, no shadows. Ethan smiled. "That sounds like exactly what you'd build." Miles hesitated. "I was hoping you'd come by sometime, not as a customer, just as someone who reminds me why it matters." Ethan nodded. "I will." As they talked, Ethan realized how many relationships had survived this season, not because they were convenient, but because they were grounded in truth. Those were the ones worth keeping. Later that night, As Ethan sat alone in his apartment, he pulled out the archived photo, the one that had started everything. He hadn't looked at it in months. He studied it now, with a strange sense of detachment. The man he'd been when he first saw it had been shattered by the implications. This version of himself saw something else entirely. A warning. He deleted the photo, not because it no longer mattered, but because its job was done. The following week, Ethan attended the final procedural hearing Avery had mentioned. He sat in the back, unnoticed, listening as the judge concluded the matter with formal finality. Papers stamped, decisions entered, lives rerouted. As Avery passed him on the way out, she paused, just for a second. "Take care of yourself," she said quietly. "You too," Ethan replied. They didn't speak again. That night, Ethan stood on his balcony and watched the city breathe. Lights flickered on and off in distant windows, lives unfolding in private, unseen ways. He thought about betrayal, how it was often framed as an ending, but for him, it had been a beginning disguised as devastation. It had stripped away illusions he'd mistaken for stability. It had forced him to confront how easily he'd minimized his own needs to preserve a version of peace that wasn't real. He understood now that fairness wasn't something the world handed you. It was something you claimed by refusing to participate in your own erasure. When Claire left 2 weeks later, they said goodbye without melodrama. No promises that felt heavy, just intention. "I'll call," she said. "I'll answer," Ethan replied. And when she walked away, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt trusted. Months passed. Ethan's life expanded not explosively, but organically. He traveled for work, mentored a junior colleague who reminded him uncomfortably of his former self. He learned to pause before reacting, to choose clarity over comfort. One evening, as he closed his laptop after a long day, he realized something simple and profound. He wasn't bracing anymore. The world still held risk. Love still carried vulnerability. But he no longer equated those things with self-sacrifice. He had learned how to stand inside uncertainty without shrinking. And that, more than justice or vindication, felt like the truest resolution of all. The email arrived on a gray morning, unremarkable in every way except for the sender's name. Ethan almost archived it without opening another reflex. He'd learned to trust, but something made him pause. "Serena Holt, I thought you'd want to know," the message began. "There's been a development." Ethan read it twice, then leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the words settled. Gavin Cross had filed an appeal, not against the sentence itself, but against a narrow portion of the restitution ruling. A technical maneuver, desperate, predictable. Serena's assessment was blunt. It's unlikely to succeed, but it may require brief testimony to close the loop. Ethan felt a flicker of irritation, quickly followed by calm. Months ago, the idea of being pulled back into Gavin's orbit would have rattled him. Now, it felt like a final chore, unpleasant, but finite. He replied with a single sentence, "Tell me what you need." The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Ethan told no one except Claire, who had returned briefly from overseas between assignments. They met for dinner the night before, the conversation drifting easily until he mentioned the hearing. "Do you want me there?" she asked. He considered it. "I don't need protection," he said, "but I wouldn't mind company afterward." She smiled. "Then I'll be nearby." The courthouse looked the same as it always had, imposing, indifferent. Ethan took his seat without ceremony, hands resting loosely in his lap. Gavin was already there, seated with his attorney, posture rigid. He looked thinner, older. The confidence that once radiated from him now felt brittle, forced. When Gavin noticed Ethan, his jaw tightened. There was no smirk this time, no calculation, just something close to resentment. The proceedings were brief. Gavin's attorney argued technicalities, attempting to recast deliberate manipulation as misunderstanding. The judge listened patiently, then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, "you're here to clarify one point. Please answer plainly." Ethan stood. The question was simple. Had Gavin ever disclosed the full scope of financial risk to him, or obtained informed consent? No, Ethan replied. He concealed it. And had you been informed, the judge continued, would you have agreed? Ethan didn't hesitate. Absolutely not. That was it. No cross-examination, no theatrics. The judge nodded, notes made, and adjourned the hearing with a brief statement denying the appeal. As people stood to leave, Ethan felt a presence beside him, Gavin. For a moment, they stood shoulder to shoulder, neither speaking. Then Gavin turned, his voice low. You could have let it go, he said. You won. What was the point of this? Ethan met his gaze calmly. You mistake silence for mercy, Gavin scoffed. You think this makes you better than me? No, Ethan said. I think it makes me done. Gavin stared at him, searching for something, anger, perhaps, or fear, finding neither. He looked away. Guards stepped in, guiding him toward the exit reserved for those who no longer chose their paths. Ethan watched him go without satisfaction. Outside, the air felt lighter. Claire was waiting across the street, hands tucked into her coat pockets. All done? She asked. Yes. Ethan replied. For real this time. They walked without speaking for a while, the city unfolding around them. Finally, Claire said, You handled that with a lot of restraint. Ethan smiled faintly. Restraint is easier when you're not carrying someone else's guilt. They stopped at a small cafe, ordering drinks they barely touched. The conversation turned toward lighter things, her upcoming travel, a project Ethan was excited about, life, ordinary and unthreatening. That night, Ethan slept deeply. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. He stopped telling the story. When new acquaintances asked vague questions about the past year, he answered briefly and redirected. When colleagues hinted at curiosity, he changed the subject. Not out of shame, but because the story no longer defined him. The past became context, not identity. Miles invited Ethan to the soft opening of his bar, a narrow space with warm lighting and no corners meant for hiding. The place was called Clear Line because everything's out in the open, Miles said. Grinning nervously, Ethan raised his glass. I can think of worse philosophies. As the night went on, Ethan watched Miles move through the room with pride and purpose. This was what rebuilding looked like, not returning to what was, but creating something aligned with who you'd become. Avery sent one final message around that time. I'm settled, I'm okay, I won't reach out again. I just wanted to say, I'm grateful you didn't let this end with bitterness. Ethan read it carefully before replying. I'm grateful too, he wrote. Take care. He meant it as an ending. Claire's overseas assignment extended longer than expected. They stayed in touch, calls when schedules aligned. Messages that didn't demand immediacy. When she finally returned for good, they didn't rush to define anything. They didn't need to. One evening, sitting on the balcony, Claire asked, Do you ever regret how it all happened? Ethan thought about it. The shock, the injustice, the months of unraveling. I regret that it took betrayal to teach me boundaries, he said. But I don't regret learning them. Claire nodded. That's a rare kind of peace. As winter gave way to spring, Ethan noticed the subtle markers of change. He laughed more easily, slept without tension, trusted his reactions instead of questioning them. He understood now that healing wasn't the absence of pain, it was the presence of choice. The night before the anniversary of the photo, the date etched into his memory, whether he wanted it or not, Ethan went for a walk alone. He stood outside Juniper and Slate, now closed. The windows dark, the sign removed. A relic. He felt no pull to go inside, no urge to revisit the moment that had once defined him. Instead, he turned away and walked home. At his door, he paused, hand on the handle, and felt something settle into place, a sense of completion that didn't need witnesses or declarations. The injustice had been confronted, the mystery resolved. The villain exposed. The cost paid. What remained was a life no longer built on compromise. Ethan stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and moved forward without looking back. The anniversary passed without ceremony. Ethan realized it only when he glanced at the date on his phone late that evening, standing in the kitchen while water boiled for tea. A year ago, almost to the minute, his life had cracked open because of a single image. Neon light, a familiar smile, a truth he hadn't been ready to face. He turned the phone face down and let the moment drift past. That, more than anything else, told him how far he'd come. Life had grown quieter, not emptier, but cleaner, the kind of quiet that didn't demand explanation. He woke early, ran along the river, went to work with purpose instead of dread. His relationships were fewer now, but sturdier. No performances, no unspoken negotiations. Claire sat at the small table near the window, reading. Glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when she heard the kettle. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Yeah. Just realized something ended without asking for permission." She understood without asking what he meant. That was one of the things he valued most about her. She didn't force emotional moments to prove themselves. They'd built something careful and real. No dramatic declarations. No promises that felt heavier than the present could support. Just consistency. Choice. Mutual respect. Later that week, Ethan received a message from Marcus. "They finalized my divorce today. Hard, but clean. Thank you again for standing up when you did." Ethan replied simply, "You did the hard part." He knew now that saving someone wasn't about pulling them out of the water. It was about showing them the shore existed. Miles's bar, Clear Line, had become a regular place for Ethan, not because of loyalty, but because it felt aligned with who he was now. Transparent, grounded, no shadows to hide in. One evening, as Ethan sat at the counter, Miles leaned over and said, "You ever think about how different things could have gone?" "All the time," Ethan replied. And I'm glad they didn't." Miles nodded. "Me too." The consequences had settled where they belonged. Gavin Cross faded from relevance. His name occasionally surfaced in industry warnings or footnotes of reform articles. Stripped of mystique and power, Avery rebuilt her life elsewhere. Quietly, away from the identity she'd lost herself inside, Ethan wished her no harm and no longer felt responsible for her healing. That, he'd learned, was the line between compassion and self-erasure. One afternoon, Ethan was asked to mentor a new hire, quiet, capable, and painfully hesitant. During their first meeting, the young man apologized twice for asking questions. Ethan stopped him gently. "Don't apologize for clarity," he said. "It's how people get hurt when they don't ask." The words surprised even him. Later, alone in his office, Ethan reflected on how instinctively they'd come, how deeply the lessons had embedded themselves, not as scars, but as structure. That evening, he and Claire walked through the city as dusk settled, lights flickering on in windows like distant stars. They passed couples arguing softly, friends laughing too loudly, strangers brushing past without noticing one another. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" Claire asked. Ethan considered it honestly. "I miss believing the world was simpler," he said, "but I don't miss being smaller." She smiled and slipped her hand into his. "I wouldn't want you smaller." Neither would he. At home, Ethan opened the last box he'd never unpacked. Inside were a few remaining artifacts, old notes, a framed photo he'd once been unable to look at, a wedding invitation from a life that felt impossibly distant. He didn't rush. He held each item, acknowledged it, and then decided where it belonged. Most went into the recycling. The photo, he removed from the frame, folded carefully, and tucked into a journal. Not as longing, but as evidence. Proof that denial had once cost him his peace. When he closed the box, it felt final. That night, Ethan stood on the balcony alone, the city breathing beneath him. He thought about the injustice that had ignited everything, the unfairness of trust betrayed, of truth delayed, of damage done while he waited quietly at home, believing patience was virtue. He understood now that patience without self-respect was just surrender in disguise. The story that began with a photo had turned into something larger than betrayal. It had become an investigation, not just into another man's deception, but into his own willingness to ignore discomfort, to keep a fragile harmony intact. The villain had paid a visible price, but the more important reckoning had been internal. Ethan had learned to listen when something felt wrong, to ask questions even when the answers might hurt, to choose clarity over comfort and dignity over denial. Claire joined him on the balcony, resting her head against his shoulder. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said. He exhaled slowly. "I was just thinking about how easy it is to mistake silence for peace." She nodded. "And how loud the truth can be when you finally let it speak." Ethan smiled. Inside, his phone buzzed once, an alert from Miles's bar opening a second location. He typed a quick congratulations, then set the phone aside. No more unfinished business. As he turned back inside, Ethan felt something settle fully. Finally, not closure as an event, but as a state of being. The past no longer pulled at him. The future no longer frightened him. And the present, clear, honest, and imperfect, was enough. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy your life. It reveals the truth that was quietly destroying you all along. This story isn't just about a photo, an affair, or a villain who finally paid the price. It's about what happens when we silence our instincts to keep the peace, when we confuse endurance with love, and when we accept discomfort as the cost of belonging. Real healing begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself. It begins when you choose honesty over comfort, clarity over denial, and self-respect over fear of being alone. Justice isn't always loud, and growth isn't always dramatic, but both require courage. If this story resonated with you, it's probably because you faced a moment where the truth asked you to be brave. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Share your reflections in the comments. And if you want more cinematic, emotional stories that speak to real life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay with us.